Greetings! It is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on D20 Modern. This is the modern take on the 3rd edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Now, where we last left off, of course, we were talking about combat. I started talking about the special attacks you can do in combat. Let's continue with them today with the Bull Rush. Now, when you Bull Rush, you're using it either as part of a move where you're making an attack action in the middle of the move, or you're doing it as part of a charge. Now, this is the exception to the doing an action in the middle of a move, is what I'm going to say about it. Now, if you should use a Bull Rush, you do not get your 5-foot step during the course of that turn. It means you're restricted to just doing your movement as part of this Bull Rush. So you initiate the Bull Rush and you move into your opponent's square. This provokes an attack of opportunity from everyone threatening you, including the target. That means if there's other people around the target you're trying to Bull Rush, they would also. The point of this is to push your target back in a straight line as far as you can. You make opposed strength checks. It will be modified by certain things. First off, you're only able to use this on a creature that's a size larger than you or smaller than that. So you compare each other's size. Whichever one of you is larger than the other, for each size category larger, you get +4, or they get +4 if they're larger than you. So if I'm trying to push a large creature, they would get +4. If I'm trying to shove a tiny creature, I would get +8, 2 size categories larger than it. Now, if I'm charging, I also get +2. If the creature has more than 2 legs or is somehow extra stable, they have greater stability, they get +4. We compare our results. If I should beat my opponent's or my target's results, I push them back 5 feet. For every 5 points higher I got than them on that roll, I push them back an additional 5 feet. So this movement by both of us provokes attack of opportunities from anyone we move by, but not from each other. We cannot provoke attack of opportunities from each other by this movement. If I fail, I'm pushed back out of my opponent's square to the square I came from. If there's someone in that square, I drop prone there. So I do have a disadvantage if I ran through or moved through someone to Bull Rush in the first place. So let's move on and talk about the Overrun. The Overrun has some similarities to the Bull Rush. First off, you can, of course, do it as part of a move, just like the Bull Rush in the middle of it, or as part of a charge, just the same way. The point of the Overrun is to shove past an opponent. I'm going to need at least 10 feet of movement in front of them in order to get this Overrun. Now, just like with the Bull Rush, moving into them provokes attacks of opportunity. And like the Bull Rush, I can't make a 5-foot step when I'm using this maneuver. Now, once I've initiated an Overrun, my target makes a choice that can either let me through, in which then I will just keep moving, I move past them, or they can attempt to stop me. If they attempt to stop me, I can make a trip attempt. Now, should my trip attempt be successful, I trip them and keep moving. If my trip attempt fails, then I most likely can either get tripped or I can prevent myself from being tripped. If I am tripped, I basically fall prone in their square. So I basically kind of fall flat underneath them if they manage during part of the trip attempt to get me tripped. On the other hand, if I manage to avoid the trip but I'm still failing to overrun them, I'm pushed back 1 square, basically to where I came from. If it is occupied, I will fall prone in that square instead. Instead of the square with them, I'm falling prone in a different square, but I'm falling prone in a square regardless with that one. It's important to note also that this can only be used on something 1 size category larger than you or smaller than that, just like with the Bull Rush. Now let's move on and start talking about the trip, because I mentioned it. You're attempting to knock an opponent down with a trip. Traditionally, you're using an unarmed melee attack in order to do this. This would provoke attacks of opportunity as any unarmed melee attack would normally for you, unless you have something that prevents that. So that would prevent this from provoking attack of opportunities just the same. Again, you can only use this on something that's 1 size larger than you or smaller than that. Now, when you're using this, you make a melee touch attack, actually. So this counts as an unarmed melee attack, for purposes of attacks of opportunity, but you're making a melee touch attack. If you are successful, you make a strength check opposed by the target's dexterity or strength, whichever one is higher they're allowed to use. Now, your target, or you, whichever one of you would be larger, just like within the bull rush, would get +4 to this. So if I'm larger than my target, I would get +4 every size category larger. The opposite would be for them. If their target I'm using is more stable, with more than one leg, or having basically a body that's built for stability, they again would get +4 to this. If I've failed to make my trip, my opponent can effectively try to trip me back. So if I succeed, I knock them down. They fall prone in their square. But if I fail, they can attempt to trip me back. Now it's important to note that this does not provoke an attack of opportunity for me, them doing this, while in the first place when I did it, it provoked. And I can't reciprocate it back again. That means if they should fail, I can't chain it back and forth over and over again. They would get a strength check opposed by my strength and dexterity with all the same modifiers we had before. If they fail, I'm fine too, but if they succeed, they could knock me prone and trip me instead. Now it's important to note there are some weapons you can use to trip instead of your hand. Of course, if you're trained at it, you're avoiding the attacks of opportunity. And the other advantage is if you fail, you can choose to drop the weapon and not have to worry about your opponent tripping you back. So it's a little advantage that I try to trip you, let's say, with a whip. Oh, I failed. I can drop the whip. I do not need to worry about you trying to trip me back. Now let's talk about disarming, or knocking something out of someone's hand. Traditionally, you're going to use a melee attack, traditionally with a weapon, though you can use unarmed hit to knock a weapon out of someone's hand. That, of course, would provoke just as normal with any kind of unarmed strike, depending on if you can punch and provoke attack of opportunities or not. So effectively, you're going to make opposed attack rolls. You're going to attack the weapon, they're basically going to attack to try to avoid it. For each weapon size that's larger than the other, the weapon gets +4. The other advantage is if you're using it with two hand, whoever's using it with two hand also gets +4 to this roll. So there are bonuses to be had depending on weapon size and using more than one hand. So if I am successful, I knock it out of the hand of my opponent. If I miss, I'm not doing it successfully. This, of course, does provoke attack of opportunity from my target. And if I fail, they can attempt to disarm me back. So it's very similar to the trip in that manner, that they can reciprocate with an attempt to disarm me in kind. If you were using unarmed, you're allowed to grab the weapon that you've disarmed. Otherwise, it just falls to the ground. Now you can disarm a ranged weapon. They don't get attack of opportunity against you if you're disarming a ranged weapon, and you treat it a little differently. You treat it like attacking an object. You're attacking this weapon's AC, rather than attacking the opposed attacks of before. Though if the person is carrying it with two hands, they would still get +2 to the defense of the item. Now, very similar to before, if you're successful, you knock it down. If you fail, they don't get to reciprocate. They have a ranged weapon in their hand. If you had open hands, you can grab it. If not, it falls in their square at their feet. So that's it for today. I introduce you to 4 more special attacks you can do during combat. The Bull Rush, where you attempt to push someone back. The Overrun, where you attempt to barrel past an opponent. The Trip, where you're attempting to knock an opponent to the ground. And the Disarm, where you're trying to drop a weapon or an item out of an opponent's hand. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about grabbing an object away from someone, grappling them, and then I'll hopefully start moving into vehicle movement and moving around combat in a vehicle. So if any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave it in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows you for the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link to the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.